crisp winter morning in 1943 found Betty Grable at the height of her fame and in the crosshairs of a chilling threat. The star, known for her sunshine smile and million-dollar legs, opened an anonymous letter to discover a stark ultimatum. "This is an extortion," it began bluntly, demanding she send $25,000 in uncut diamonds under threat of your life or great bodily harm. For America's favorite pinup girl adored by millions of GIs overseas, it was a plot twist that could have come right out of a film noir. Soon FBI agents were lurking in a Los Angeles cemetery, disguised as gravediggers and armed with binoculars, laying a trap for the shadowy figure bold enough to menace Hollywood's sweetheart. It was quite a story, and yet only one part of her extraordinary life, one that embodied apple pie American innocence, dark schemes, and the birth of modern sex appeal. This is Betty Grable's full, untold story. Welcome to Hollywood Mysteries. Elizabeth Betty Grable entered the world on December 18, 1916 in St. Louis, Missouri, as the youngest child of John and Lillian Grable. From the moment Betty could walk, her mother Lillian saw show business destiny in her daughter's dimpled smile. Lillian Grable was the archetypal stage mother, relentless, resourceful, and often utterly ruthless. She entered tiny Betty in every local dance class and kiddie beauty pageant she could find. She was determined to mold a star. When formal opportunities ran dry, Lillian simply invented her own. She'd trot Betty out at social gatherings and prod the shy girl to sing and dance on command for assembled adults. The pressure was enormous. Underneath the blonde curls and rosy cheeks, little Betty developed a fear of crowds and even bouts of sleepwalking, clearly symptoms of the stress her mother piled on her. But nothing would deter Lillian's drive, not even the law. In 1929, as the Great Depression loomed, Lillian packed 12-year-old Betty onto a train bound for Hollywood, leaving the rest of the family behind in Missouri. There was a slight hitch. Child labor rules meant it was illegal for young Betty to work in films. To Lillian, this was merely an inconvenience to be outwitted. She sneakily forged her daughter's birth documents, claiming 12-year-old Betty was actually 15. With her hair bleached platinum and a new alias, Frances Dean, on the paperwork, Betty slipped into the adult world of casting calls that should have been off-limits to a child. Astonishingly, it worked, at first. In a town teeming with starlets, the fresh-faced teen managed to land her first film role as a chorus girl that same year. One producer after another took a chance on the vivacious girl with the cherubic face, and none bothered to verify her age. They simply couldn't resist her wholesome and potentially very lucrative charm. By age 13, Betty was dancing on screen as one of the Goldwyn Girls, a troupe of lithe young women, or in her case, children, assembled by studio mogul Samuel Goldwyn. Sharing the stage with future legends like Lucille Ball and Paulette Goddard, Betty learned early that Hollywood could make dreams come true overnight and dash them away just as swiftly. In Betty's case, the dream soon hit a hard stop. Finally, executives at Fox Studios, one of her early employers, got wind of her real age. The discovery came with an emphatic pink slip. At 13, Betty Grable was fired, unceremoniously shown the door for being underage. Mother and daughter had flown too close to the sun, and for the moment, Hollywood's gates slammed shut. It was a rare example of the studios actually protecting one of its actors from the rampant dangers of the wild and very adult world of early Hollywood, even if their primary motivation was to keep the law off their backs. Humiliated but seemingly undeterred, Betty spent her mid-teens picking up the pieces. She bounced between studios, a short contract at RKO here, a bit part at Paramount there, slowly rebuilding trust once she was legally allowed on set at age 15. Casting agents pigeonholed her as the perky co-ed and B-movie campus comedies. She dutifully played one wholesome ingenue after another, even as she hungered for a real breakthrough. It would be a tough few years of hard grind for Betty. Off-screen life moved fast. In 1937, at just 20, Betty eloped in Yuma, Arizona with former child star Jackie Coogan, famous as the winsome scamp from Charlie Chaplin's The Kid. The marriage was hasty and ill-timed. Coogan was embroiled in a bitter lawsuit against his parents over his childhood earnings, and turmoil followed him home. Despite Coogan being the major star, it was Grable who paid not only for their wedding reception, but who also put up the cash for their modest marital home. Right from the outset, the marriage was temperamental and Coogan proved difficult to live with, which was probably partly down to the stress of having to sue his own parents for millions of dollars. Within 2 years, the young couple had buckled under the strain and quietly divorced in 1939. If you love the tales of old Hollywood, you'll also love my other series, Hollywood Histories. This is a podcast series where I get into more detailed looks at a whole range of things from Hollywood's past. I've covered the making of King Kong, the reincarnated screenwriter from Gone with the Wind, the life of Butterfly McQueen, and in the near future I'll be looking into something I'll be coming back to later in this episode, the Hollywood Canteen. If you want to get that weekly podcast as well as access to the full archive of past shows, then all you have to do is sign up to the Hollywood Histories tier on my Patreon page, or click join right below this video. For just $3 a month, all these perks will be yours, and you'll also be helping me to grow Hollywood Mysteries into something bigger and better than ever. Thank you so much to all the supporters. It's amazing to have you on board already. If you're curious about the series, there's even a week-long free trial on Patreon, so you can check it out before you commit. Now let's get back to the girl with the $1 million legs. For Betty, the late 1930s were a trial by fire, personally and professionally. By 1939, she found herself unemployed once more, let go from her Paramount contract after a string of forgettable roles. Frustrated and feeling washed up at just 23, she resolved to quit Hollywood entirely. So Betty headed east to try her luck on the Broadway stage. It was a surprising move for a starlet who had, until then, been deemed only a photogenic song and dance girl. Now she wanted to try and make an impression on New York's theatrical elite. But almost as if by script, Betty's luck was about to turn. Cast in the 1939 musical Du Barry Was a Lady, she stopped the show cold. Night after night on the New York stage, audiences roared for the blonde singer with the wide, joyous grin. One particularly important theatergoer took notice, Darryl Zanuck. The production chief of 20th Century Fox happened to catch Betty's performance. Zanuck saw what the other New Yorkers saw, a huge smile, star-like charisma, and a stunning pair of gams. He wasted no time. With a stroke of a pen, Zanuck offered Betty a long-term Hollywood contract, a chance at the big time, round 2. Betty Grable returned to Hollywood in 1940, not as a wide-eyed teen, but as a maturing 23-year-old on the brink of stardom. Zanuck's hunch about her proved to be on the money. Fox cast Betty in a lavish 1940 Technicolor musical called Down Argentine Way, and sheer luck intervened to make it her big break. She was originally slotted as a second fiddle, but when the film's established star Alice Faye fell ill, Betty inherited the lead role. When Down Argentine Way hit screens, it was a smash, with audiences charmed by the blue-eyed blonde who could tap dance and sing with irresistible verve. Overnight, Betty Grable went from chorus girl to headliner. Fox knew it had struck gold, and it quickly groomed her as the studio's reigning musical queen of the 1940s. What followed was an almost unbroken string of hits that lit up an otherwise dark wartime decade. Betty's specialty was frothy musical comedies shot in vibrant colors, the kind of pure entertainment that offered escapism to a nation at war. In Moon Over Miami, Coney Island, Springtime in the Rockies, to name but a few, she glowed on screen with an effervescent, almost athletic energy. Her co-stars were often dashing leading men like Victor Mature and John Payne, but it was Betty's name that packed theaters. With each new film, Fox showcased her sunny personality, nimble dancing, and of course, those legs that would soon achieve infamy of their own. By 1943, Betty was the #1 box office draw in the world, outselling even male icons like Humphrey Bogart and Clark Gable at the ticket booth. The U.S. Treasury Department noted that in 1946 to 47, she was the highest paid woman in America, earning over $300,000 a year, a staggering fortune at the time. Quite a turnaround in just a few short years. But behind that success lay years of sacrifice and unlikely twists. She had some lucky breaks for sure, but the rest was a product of endless determination and grueling faith that it would all come good one day. During this meteoric rise, Betty was also picking up the pieces of her love life. Not long after divorcing Jackie Coogan, she became entangled with George Raft, a suave, dark-haired film gangster known for his real-life underworld connections. Raft was older, married, and as dangerous as the characters he played. At first, Betty fell hard for the bad boy glamour, but the affair turned sour when Raft's temper flared into violence. After one terrifying incident in which he reportedly beat her mercilessly, Betty fled for good. Raft refused to let go easily. Even later, he had one of his henchmen spy on Betty during her dates. This particular act of psychological abuse did have a karmic conclusion, however. The lackey was instructed to climb up a tree and look through her bedroom window to see what men she was entertaining. However, Betty realized what was going on when she heard a thud and saw a shady figure limping away with a few broken ribs. It was a scene that could have been lifted from a crime melodrama or a comedy, but it taught Betty a lesson. Her off-screen life was becoming dramatic and absurd, and it needed to be brought to heel. Her heart would finally find a safer haven on a movie set in 1942. While filming the musical Springtime in the Rockies, Betty's eyes met those of Harry James, the dapper, dark-haired trumpet virtuoso hired to perform in the film. James was one of the most famous big band leaders in the country. He was charismatic, talented, and undeniably handsome in his Air Force uniform for the role. Sparks flew on screen and off. There was just one complication. Harry James was married. Nevertheless, the bandleader was known to have an eye for beautiful women, and soon he and Betty were deep into a clandestine romance. In the buttoned-up morality of the 1940s, their affair was a genuine scandal, a married man and America's new sweetheart carrying on in secret. Betty was also supposed to be a propaganda image for military men fighting in Europe and the Pacific, just the kind of wholesome gal they were supposed to be fighting for. The idea of her taking up with a married man was the exact opposite of the image they were trying to push. Fox studio executives wrung their hands, fearful of how an exposed affair might tarnish their Golden Girls' reputation. They wouldn't have to worry for long to find out just how. In late 1942, Betty discovered she was pregnant with Harry's child. The news set off code red at the studio. An unwed pregnancy could ruin a young starlet's career in those days, so Zanuck and company moved swiftly. They told Harry to divorce his wife, Louise Tobin, and marry Betty immediately before gossip columnists could pounce. Anything else, it was implied, would have consequences for them both. On July 5, 1943, Betty Grable and Harry James exchanged vows in a quick Las Vegas ceremony. Not exactly the storybook wedding Hollywood dreamed of for its darling, but a necessary one under the circumstances. The marriage made headlines nationwide and the scandal was averted. It was even twisted into a new propaganda coup when GIs began repeating a new slogan, "I want a girl just like the girl that married Harry James." A few months later, she gave birth to a healthy baby girl, Victoria, named after one of her film characters. A second daughter, Jessica, would follow in 1947. To the public, Betty and Harry looked like the perfect wartime love story, the pin-up queen and the prince of swing building a family as America fought overseas. But as Betty would learn, happy ever after is never guaranteed, even for the girl with the million-dollar legs. Meanwhile, as World War II raged, Betty Grable's image became nothing less than a national talisman. In late 1943, with her popularity peaking, she posed for a quick promotional photo on the Fox lot to publicize an upcoming musical, Sweet Rosie O'Grady, which would release in October that year. That simple pin-up publicity portrait would soon transcend its studio origins and make history. Betty stands in a white one-piece swimsuit, back turned coyly toward the camera, head tilted over her shoulder in a flirtatious smile. The pose seemed playful and spontaneous, but it was in fact a bit of clever staging. Betty was a few months pregnant with Victoria during that shoot and self-conscious about her figure. The photographer, Frank Powolny, suggested she turn her back to hide her baby bump, and Betty gamely obliged. Powolny snapped 2 quick shots. The second captured a magic that would fuel countless daydreams. In that single image, Betty Grable crystallized an ideal of wholesome mid-century American beauty that felt like hope itself to a generation of young men facing peril. Fox distributed the poster to boost morale, and the response was explosive. Nearly 3 million copies of Betty's swimsuit pinup were sent to barracks and battleships around the world. Soldiers pasted it in lockers, tucked it in their packs as a good luck charm, and most famously, painted it on the noses of fighter planes. She felt that one of her greatest accomplishments in life was bringing a little happiness to our soldiers, Betty's daughter Victoria later said. Indeed, Betty took that responsibility to heart. She wrote back to countless GIs who mailed her fan letters from the front, knowing a cheerful note from their favorite star could brighten even a foxhole in Europe or the Pacific. A born entertainer, she also volunteered nights at the Hollywood Canteen, dancing with off-duty servicemen who looked amazed to find Betty Grable herself on their arm. At war bong drives, she went even further. She even auctioned off her own nylon stockings to raise funds for the cause, since silk and nylon were scarce and precious. Grinning in newsreels as frenetic bidders waved money, Betty cracked that if a pair of her stockings could help beat Hitler, she'd gladly walk home barefoot. Also in 1943, the U.S. government declared Betty Grable's legs a national asset, literally. In a brilliant publicity stunt, Fox had her famously shapely legs insured with Lloyd's of London for $1 million. The press went wild, dubbing her $1 Million Legs, a nickname that followed Betty forever. She joked about it with typical modesty. "They are fine for pushing the foot pedals in my car," Betty deadpanned when Life magazine inquired about her leg's celebrity status. Another time, asked to comment on her curvy hips, she laughed. "They're just where my legs hook on." Betty understood that her figure, especially those legs, had become a phenomenon of its own, but she never took it too seriously. "I became a star for 2 reasons, and I'm standing on them," she said. The public ate it up, but privately the attention on her body could wear on her. "People talk about my legs as if I were a centipede," Betty later complained, wishing she got more credit for her acting and dancing. Whatever misgivings she had, there was no denying the hope and desire Betty's image inspired. Pin-up photos of Betty outsold even those of glamour goddesses like Rita Hayworth. Hers was the face young soldiers taped to their Jeep dashboards and bomber cockpits for luck. One Life magazine survey in 1943 found Betty was, by overwhelming consensus, the servicemen's ideal woman, the all-American girl worth fighting for. That devotion sometimes crossed into the tragic. One American airman was reportedly found dead in his crashed fighter plane with Betty's picture still clutched in his hand, as if her smiling presence had been his final comfort. Hearing sex stories moved Betty deeply. She was proud, above all, to represent the girls back home and to help light up the world when it was so dark, as she told her family. Yet, even as she cheered up the world, Betty's own life had its shadows. That extortion threat she received in 1943 was a horrifying reminder that fame had a serious dark side. In fact, the first mysterious letter read as follows: "This is an extortion. Under threat of your life or great bodily harm, gather $25,000 in uncut diamonds and mail them in 2 envelopes addressed to Jonathan C. Wilde, Esquire, Gates Hotel, 5th and Figueroa, Los Angeles, California." It's signed off as the Lep, seemingly shorthand for the leopard. Betty called the FBI and they were soon on the case. They set up a trap for the crook, but the Lep wasn't fooled and he didn't show up. However, a month later, a second letter followed, this time ordering Betty to deliver $5,000 cash to a stranger in a cemetery under threat of death. This time it was signed off as Snow. Betty played along with the FBI in tow. On a March morning, she drove as instructed toward Hollywood Memorial Cemetery, terrified and having no idea whether a gunman might emerge from the tombstones. Little did the extortionist know, dozens of agents lay in wait, disguised as gardeners and mourners, guns drawn. Furthermore, they had deployed the highest tech of the day, using a 16mm camera with a telephoto lens to capture the criminal when he emerged, as well as walkie-talkies to coordinate the sting. When a young man darted out to snatch what he thought was Betty's payoff package, agents tackled him to the ground. The culprit turned out to be an 18-year-old drifter, Russell Alexanderson, who had seen the star's skyrocketing success and tried to cash in. Betty's nightmare was over almost as soon as it began. Alexanderson got off with 5 years probation until he dim-wittedly attempted a second extortion the following year for $500, this time earning himself a well-deserved prison term. Through it all, Betty kept up a brave face in public, never letting on to her fans that she'd been living a suspense thriller behind the scenes. Back on set, Betty remained the consummate professional, churning out hits through the war years. Films like 1944's Pinup Girl blatantly capitalized on her status. It featured Betty as a USO entertainer essentially playing a version of her real self. In Mother Wore Tights, a nostalgic musical about a vaudeville family, Betty delivered one of her warmest performances, and the movie became Fox's top-grossing film of that year. Critics might have snubbed such lightweight fare, but audiences couldn't get enough. Betty's consistency was astonishing. From 1942 through 1951, she ranked in the top 10 of Hollywood's box office stars every single year. For 12 straight years, the American public queued up to see Betty Grable, a longevity few stars have ever matched. As American as apple pie, baseball, and Betty Grable was by now a common catchphrase. Her appeal cut across demographics. Parents saw in her the wholesome daughter or dependable sweetheart. Servicemen saw a dream girl. Children saw a friendly, funny lady who danced with cartoonish exuberance. She was, in many ways, America's sweetheart of the 1940s, but unlike earlier sweethearts, Betty's allure had a bold dash of sex appeal along with the sweetness. She could wink and shimmy in a sequin dress, hands on her famous hips, and make even staid middle America blush, just a little. By the dawn of the 1950s, Betty Grable was sitting atop the Hollywood heap, and she knew her worth. After dozens of films that netted Fox a fortune, the studio's blonde cash cow decided it was time to assert herself. She marched into the front office with a straightforward request: a raise. It was a plucky move in an era when actors were expected to be compliant contract players. Fox's executives flatly refused. Betty's popularity might have made her one of the most famous faces on Earth, but to the studio brass, she was still an employee who should know her place. But Betty wasn't here on a lark. That day, she did something unthinkable. Eyes flashing with anger, she strode into Darryl Zanuck's office, yanked her studio contract from his desk, and tore the papers to shreds right in front of him. For a moment, time stopped, the petite blonde star literally in a confrontation with the most powerful mogul in Hollywood, bits of her contract drifting like snow to the floor. It was meant to be a gesture of independence, and it backfired spectacularly. Zanuck's pride was wounded. To teach his star a lesson, he plotted a humiliation that would also change Hollywood and world history. Feeling bitter, he fired Betty from the next big project on the docket, a flashy musical comedy titled Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. The lead role, which had been earmarked as a new Grable vehicle, was swiftly recast with a younger starlet then on the rise, a certain Marilyn Monroe. The film, released in 1953, turned Monroe into a megawatt star overnight, one that completely eclipsed Grable, while Betty was left to ponder the cruel twist. Gentlemen Prefer Blondes could have been her picture. Instead, it became the symbol of a generational torch passing. Betty Grable out, Marilyn Monroe in. In truth, Betty's career wasn't finished yet, but the era of her unchallenged reign was. Zanuck and Grable made amends soon enough after that showdown. The studio couldn't simply toss aside a star of Betty's caliber, even if her clout had slipped. As a peace offering and perhaps a subtle reminder of who was boss, Zanuck cast Betty in How to Marry a Millionaire, alongside Monroe and Lauren Bacall. The marketing practically wrote itself. 3 glamorous women of different vintages in a single Technicolor rom-com. For Zanuck, it was a way of establishing the new hierarchy and letting Betty know she was no longer top dog. Inevitably, rumors buzzed that on-set clause had come out. The papers went with the tale of the aging blonde versus the ascendant blonde, a battle of egos and sex symbols. The Grable-Monroe catfight was one for the ages, they claimed, and it was all overseen by the ice-cool Bacall, puffing a cigarette and watching on. Nothing could have been further from the truth, however. Betty, at 36, the elder stateswoman of the trio, surprised everyone with her grace and good humor toward her young co-stars. She knew her time at the top was winding down and accepted it with disarming humility. And in fact, she liked Monroe. One day in front of the crew, she put an arm around Marilyn and cheerfully declared, "Honey, I've had my turn. Go get yours. It's your turn now." The simple, genuine remark left Monroe beaming and spoke volumes about Betty's character. Rather than rivalry, she offered a little mentorship. It even went to a near-biblical level at one point. During a publicity photo shoot, Betty noticed Marilyn's toenail polish was chipped and personally kneeled down to give the bombshell a fresh pedicure on the spot. It was an act so unexpected that it passed into Hollywood lore, the reigning pinup queen literally polishing the feet of the new goddess set to replace her. That warmth and humbleness won Betty tremendous respect. Monroe never forgot Betty's kindness. She later refused to be photographed stepping into Betty's old dressing room at Fox. She wouldn't play part in any publicity stunt that disrespected Grable's legacy. In Marilyn's eyes, Betty remained a beloved trailblazer who deserved honor, not pity, and indeed Betty's legacy as the original blonde bombshell of the war era was secure. On the set of How to Marry a Millionaire, the two women genuinely bonded. Observers noted Marilyn studying Betty intently, watching how she posed, how she lit a cigarette, how she timed a joke. In her formative years, Monroe had idolized Grable. Now she was learning directly from her. Betty handled the whole affair with a class that is rare in the annals of show business. With How to Marry a Millionaire a hit in late 1953, Betty enjoyed one last burst of big-screen glory. But the writing was on the wall. Hollywood was falling in love with a new generation of stars and a new style of filmmaking. The lavish musical comedies that had been Betty's bread and butter were fast becoming passé in the rock and roll 1950s. After one final 1955 film, the tellingly titled How to Be Very, Very Popular, Betty decided to bow out of movies on her own terms. She was only 38, hardly old, but she had been performing professionally for over 2 relentless decades. "I'm tired of being Betty Grable," she sighed around that time, evidently craving a taste of an ordinary life out of the spotlight. She didn't retire from entertainment altogether, far from it, but the Hollywood chapter of her life closed with surprisingly little fanfare. With 2 daughters to raise and a troubled marriage to save, Betty shifted focus. She and Harry James moved to a spacious ranch in San Fernando Valley and later tried their luck in the desert neon of Las Vegas. There, at the lavish casinos, the couple became a fixture of the Vegas entertainment circuit. Betty would perform 2 shows nightly in musical reviews at the Sands or the Flamingo, belting out tunes and tapping those famous feet for adoring crowds. Meanwhile, Harry headlined with his big band or played trumpet solos under the showroom spotlights. On the surface, it was a continuation of their glory days, the king of swing and the queen of the pinups, still drawing crowds. Yet behind the glitz, the relationship had grown darker. Harry James's old demons of gambling and infidelity only grew worse in Vegas's playground. He lost enormous sums at the casino tables, sometimes blowing through hundreds of thousands of dollars of Betty's hard-earned money. By one account, over the years, Harry squandered the equivalent of $24 million, essentially Betty's entire film fortune, at the craps and blackjack tables. His womanizing, too, continued unabated. The same restless appetites that had drawn him to Betty in 1942 drew him to showgirls and cocktail waitresses 2 decades later. Betty's complaints about his behavior were met with violence. For Betty, a loyal wife who had tolerated Harry's indiscretions for far too long, the breaking point came on New Year's Day, 1965. After 22 years of marriage, she finally told Harry it was over. Something about the notion of a fresh year had given her the courage to break free. In the divorce filing, she cited extreme cruelty, a terse legal phrase that encompassed years of betrayal, public embarrassments, and private anguish. The era of Hollywood's one-time dream couple ended not with a bang, but with Betty quietly packing her bags and leaving the house she had shared with Harry and their girls. In truth, their marriage had been in decline for years. Friends noticed Betty's sunny spirit dimming in the late 50s and early 1960s as financial strain and heartbreak piled up. By the mid-60s, she was, for the first time, broke. The woman whose name once topped every marquee now found herself doing commercials for girdles on TV, striking her old pin-up pose to hawk Playtex undergarments for a paycheck. Betty didn't complain. Work was work, and she was grateful for opportunities to keep performing. On stage, she reinvented herself for a new era, taking on musical theater tours and nightclub acts. She played the lead in Hello, Dolly in summer stock, wowed crowds in Las Vegas productions, and even flexed her comedic chops in a road company of Born Yesterday. Audiences still adored her, older now, a bit plumper, but with the same magnetic grin and impeccable timing. Fellow performers who worked with Betty during this period described her as unassuming and hardworking, more comfortable gossiping with chorus dancers backstage than schmoozing at Hollywood parties. She had, in effect, come full circle to the simple love of performance that drove her as a child. The fame, the ego, the pressures of studio stardom, she left those in the past. In her personal life, Betty found a second chance at happiness with the most unlikely partner. In the late 1960s, she began a relationship with a young dancer named Bob Remick, who was fully 27 years her junior. The age gap raised a few cruel jibes, but Betty glowed in Bob's companionship. He was gentle, doting, and utterly devoted, perhaps more fan than lover at first, but he became her rock in her final years. They never married, yet remained together until the end, living a quiet life split between California and occasional stage tours. Friends said that Betty seemed truly at ease for once. She could laugh, play cards. She was an avid and cutthroat gin rummy player on afternoons with the gals, and enjoy life as just Betty, and not a public commodity. She even kept her old Hollywood awards tucked away under the kitchen sink, literally hiding her trophies with the pots and pans. It was as if Betty had finally separated the star from the woman, and the woman preferred the quiet, ordinary moments that fame had long denied her. In the spring of 1973, Betty Grable was still performing, still lighting up stages with the vitality of someone half her age. Those who saw her in a nightclub act that year marveled that the 56-year-old could kick and twirl with nearly the same spark of the girl from down Argentine Way. That's why the news came as a shock. In June 1973, Betty was diagnosed with advanced lung cancer. A lifetime of heavy smoking, 3 packs a day since her teen years, by some accounts, had finally caught up with her. The disease moved swiftly and mercilessly. Just a few weeks later, on July 2, 1973, Betty passed away at a hospital in Santa Monica, California. Her 2 daughters, Vicky and Jessica, were by her side, as was Bob Remick. At 56, the girl who once symbolized youth and vitality for an entire generation was gone, and far too soon. President Richard Nixon, upon hearing of her death, called her a symbol of the joy and the vitality of America, a fitting tribute to the impact she made. Hollywood dimmed its lights in her memory. The Los Angeles Times ran her obituary under the inevitable headline, "The Girl with the $1 Million Legs." The public's outpouring of grief was genuine. Fans left flowers on her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, and old comrades from the Hollywood canteen days saluted her memory for lifting soldiers' spirits when it mattered most. One telegram that arrived at her family's home stood out. It was from Marilyn Monroe's widower, Joe DiMaggio, expressing condolences and noting that Marilyn had always admired Betty. Monroe herself had died a decade earlier, but DiMaggio wanted Betty's children to know how much respect the younger blonde had for the trail Betty blazed. It was a touching postscript to a sisterhood of 2 icons. Betty's funeral was modest by Hollywood standards, just friends and family and a minister who recalled how Elizabeth Grable, as he insisted on calling her, was a loving mother and a regular gal in private. As her casket was lowered, something bizarre and quite eerie occurred. A nearby radio playing softly for the gathered mourners just happened to broadcast a tune Harry James had recorded long ago, I Can't Begin to Tell You, which was, in fact, one of the love songs from a Betty Grable movie. Fatefully or not, Harry James himself would die of cancer just days later, almost as if their stories were bound together to the end. Betty left an indelible imprint on pop culture, literally and figuratively. In fact, at Grauman's Chinese Theater, you can still find the concrete imprint of one of Betty's legs cast in 1943, alongside the handprints of more traditional stars. She also left a mark in perhaps the unlikeliest of places, the publishing empire of a man named Hugh Hefner. As a young GI in the 1940s, Hefner was one of millions who fell under the spell of Betty's pinup. It's said that after the war, when he founded Playboy magazine, Hefner had Betty Grable's picture in mind as an inspiration for the girl next door's sensuality he wanted to capture. But behind the image was a real human being, one who endured the slaps of a domineering stage mother, the fickleness of Hollywood fame, the anguish of turbulent marriages, and the terror of a life-threatening extortion plot, yet somehow emerged with her charm intact. Her story, like her famous pinup, will be sticking around for a while yet. She was the sweetheart of the greatest generation, and will always be the girl with the $1,000,000 legs. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed this one. I think Betty was a pretty amazing figure, even if she doesn't really get much credit these days. Let me know what you think about her, and if you have a favorite movie of hers, by leaving me a comment. Also, a reminder that we now have a third mysteries channel called Society Mysteries, in which Chester will be looking into the life of famous figures from beyond the worlds of music and movies. Be sure to check it out. There's a link in the description. Thanks for watching. I've been Ava. Until next time, sweet dreams.